Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a time period that I have to admit I didn't know a whole lot about before digging into these notes. We're looking at the years 1879 to 1904.
Right.
And my first thought was, okay, that's a very specific 25-year slice. Why are we zooming in right there?
It does seem a little random, but if you look at the life cycle of this movement, this era, is basically its teenage years.
The teenage years.
Exactly. I mean, think about what happens to a teenager. You get these massive growth spurts. Your voice changes. You're trying to figure out who you are, independent of your parents.
And you probably make a few reckless mistakes.
You make a few reckless mistakes along the way. That is a perfect description of what was happening to the church between 1879 and 1904.
That's a great analogy. Because looking at our source material, section 7 of the Church Heritage Manual, it just feels incredibly chaotic. You've got this explosive growth happening overseas, but back home in America, it seems like everything is either catching on fire or, well, dying.
It's a total paradox. The section title says it all. Significant advances and losses. And the biggest question they were facing was really one of survival. How does a movement keep going when the parents, the founders, start passing away?
Right. So our mission today is to unpack how they managed that transition. And reading this, it seems like the solutions, they didn't come from the top down.
No, not at all.
They came from some really unlikely places.
That's the key theme here. Innovation, it almost always starts at the grassroots.
So let's start with the youth movement then, because the material takes us to 1879, Hazelton Township, Michigan. And I was expecting to read about, a committee meeting or a board of elders planning a program.
No, absolutely not. There was no department, no budget, not really any adult supervision to speak of.
Instead, we have two kids, Harry Fenner and Luther Warren. And the source says Luther was only 14.
Harry was 17. Luther was 14.
Yeah.
I mean, just pause and think about that for a second. Think about the 14-year-olds,
Getting a 14-year-old to organize their own laundry is a huge victory. These two are organizing a movement.
They were just walking along a country road, talking, and they had this realization that the church, as it existed, didn't really have a place for them. It was all adult-focused. They felt a spiritual need that just wasn't being met. So instead of complaining about it or, leaving, they went into a bedroom in one of their parents' houses, prayed, and they drafted a pledge.
Just the two of them.
Just the two of them. They started the first Young People's Society completely on their own initiative. And it wasn't about entertainment. It was about doing missionary work, temperance work.
And what's really wild to me is how long it took the actual church leadership to catch up with what these teenagers were doing.
Oh, it took decades. The source notes that the Ohio Conference didn't form a wider youth organization until 1899. That's 20 years after Fenner and Warren started their little group.
And membership cards didn't even show up until 1901.
Right. And the General Conference Youth Department, the official global structure, wasn't formally organized until 1907.
So if those two kids hadn't taken that initiative back in 1879, who knows how long that gap would have existed?
Exactly. It just goes to show that in this era, the advances were often bubbling up from the bottom. We see the exact same thing with the literature work.
The Colporteur Ministry. I still stumble over that word. Colporteur.
It's an old term, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, it just means a book distributor or a peddler. But the concept itself was revolutionary for them.
So introduce us to George King.
Okay, so George King, around 1881, he feels this burden to distribute Uriah Smith's book, Daniel and the Revelation. Now, before this, the standard way of doing things was basically to print tracts and just give them away. It was a cost center.
Right. You pay to print it, you hand it out, you lose money. End of story.
Precisely. But King has this idea. What if we sell the book? What if we actually market it to the general public?
It sounds like such a simple business pivot, but why was that so important for the mission?
Because it turned a cost center into an economic engine. By selling the books, by subscription, you weren't just covering the printing costs. You were generating enough of a margin to pay the person selling it. So suddenly, you have this Colporteur Ministry where thousands of people could earn a living, where students could earn scholarships while they were doing the work.
It effectively crowdsourced the entire workforce. You don't need to hire thousands of salaried pastors. You have an army of self-supporting salespeople.
And that financial independence was absolutely crucial because the church was about to try and do something incredibly expensive.
Right.
Go global.
Which, of course, leads us to the money. The source mentions this major shift in how the church handled its finances right before this era kicked off. It talks about moving from systematic benevolence to the tithing system. Can you break that down? Because systematic benevolence, it sounds like a very complicated way to say donating.
It was complicated. Systematic benevolence, which they'd used in the early days, was often based on property,
Yeah.
on what you owned, your assets. It was almost like a property tax within the church structure.
Okay, so if I had a big farm, I paid more, even if I had a bad harvest that year.
Roughly speaking, yeah, it was a bit rigid. But in 1878, they transitioned to the tithing system. This is the biblical concept of 10% of your increase or your income,
Which is much more scalable.
and much more equitable. If you earn more, you give more. If you earn less, you give less. But the most important part is that combined with the income from the book sales we just talked about, this created a really reliable financial backbone.
And looking at the statistics in the source, the results were immediate.
Oh, they're staggering.
I was looking at the comparison between 1863, when the church first organized, and just 20 years later, 1883. The number of churches went from 125 to 680,
That's a five-fold increase.
a five-fold increase. And membership did the same thing, from 3,500 to 17,500.
But the big number,
The tithe, it surpassed $100,000.
which in the 1880s is a massive amount of purchasing power. This is the money that allowed them to stop just thinking about the American Midwest and start looking at a map of the entire world.
Okay, so let's look at that map. Because this really is the era where the movement stops being an American thing and starts becoming a global thing. We've got Europe, Australia, Africa, the Pacific. Where do we even start?
Well, let's start down under in Australia and New Zealand. I mean, this was a huge logistical leap.
Who made that trip?
You had a team led by S.N. Haskell, M.C. Israel, and J.O. Corliss. They arrived with the goal of building a presence, basically from scratch. And the source notes they faced considerable opposition.
I can imagine. It's not like Australia was just sitting there waiting with open arms for a new American religion.
Not at all. But they used that same institution-building strategy. They didn't just stand on street corners and preach. They built a publishing house in Melbourne in 1886. They established Avondale College in 1897 to train local workers.
And here's the detail that I found the most surprising. The health food factory.
The Sanitarium Health Food Company, yeah. Yep. Established in 1898.
I think most of us today see health food and think of it as a lifestyle choice. But in this context, it was a business strategy, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The source says it explicitly. It became a financial backer for the entire division. Just like the book sales, the food factory generated profit that could be plowed right back into the mission. It made the Australian work self-sustaining.
So they didn't have to wait on checks from America.
Exactly. It's brilliant.
Okay, let's jump continents to Africa, because there's a name drop in the source material here that really caught me off guard. Cecil Rhodes.
The Prime Minister of Cape Colony. A massive, massive figure in British imperialism.
And a very controversial one. So why on earth is a group of SDA missionaries meeting with Cecil Rhodes?
It's 1894. Peter Wessels and a delegation, they go to see him. And it's purely pragmatic. They needed land.
They just walked in and asked for land?
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And it worked. Rhodes instructed his administrator up in Bulawayo to grant them land for a mission in what was then Rhodesia.
And that land became Seleucia College.
That land became Seleucia College.
Yeah.
Yes. The force actually notes that the first college outside North America opened a year earlier, in 1893, near Cape Town. That was the forerunner to Heidelberg College. But Seleucia was a major, major milestone. It just shows they were willing to navigate the geopolitical realities of the time to get a foothold.
It's fascinating. And we can't forget the Pacific and Asia. I love the image of the ship Pitcairn.
The missionary ship.
Mm-hmm.
John Ite visited Pitcairn Island in 1886. And then you have work opening up in Fiji under J.E. Fulton.
Fulton, as in Fulton College.
The very same. The names on the buildings today are the names of these pioneers. And you have to mention Abram LaRue in Hong Kong.
The self-supporting colporteur again.
Yes, he just went. He went to Hong Kong in 1888. He wasn't sent with some big entourage or big salary. He just went, supported himself, and paved the way for everyone who came after him.
So on the map, everything looks great. The pins are dropping everywhere. But if we zoom back in on the internal state of the church, things were getting messy.
Messy is putting it lightly. While they were conquering the globe, they were in some ways almost losing their soul.
Which brings us to the 1888 crisis. The source describes the context leading up to this, and it talks about the evangelists in the 1860s and 70s being so focused on the law. What does that mean in practice?
Well, think about their position. They were a tiny group arguing for the distinctiveness of the Ten Commandments, especially the Sabbath. So they became excellent debaters. They could prove you wrong. They could win any argument about the law.
But winning an argument isn't the same as winning a heart.
That's it exactly. The source says they often neglected the faith of Jesus. Their preaching became dry. It became argumentative, legalistic. They were focusing so much on doing all the right things that they lost sight of trusting the Savior who did it all for them.
And this all just explodes at the General Conference session in Minneapolis in 1888.
It was a watershed moment, a vigorous, really heated debate over righteousness by faith.
For someone who didn't go to seminary, can you unpack righteousness by faith? What were they actually fighting about?
It's the difference between saying, I am saved because I keep the Sabbath and eat the right food, versus saying, I am saved entirely by what Jesus did for me on the cross, and I keep the Sabbath because I love him. It sounds subtle, but it's the difference between a legalistic cult and a gospel-centered church.
And the source mentions this wasn't just settled with a vote and a handshake. It required a literary correction.
Right. Ellen White began writing books specifically to fix this imbalance. Books like The Desire of Ages and, of course, Steps to Christ.
I've heard of Steps to Christ. It's a classic.
It is. And if you read it, it is just undeniably focused on the person of Jesus. That book was a direct response to the dryness of the previous decades. It was a major course correction to save the theology of the movement.
So 1888 fixes the theology, but there was another huge problem. The organization itself was broken.
It was a total bottleneck. By 1900, you have this global work, Australia, Europe, Africa, but every decision was still being micromanaged from Battle Creek, Michigan.
Every decision had to go all the way back to Michigan.
Pretty much. The structure was still designed for that little group of 3,500 people, not a global denomination. It was suffocating the growth.
So enter the 1901 General Conference.
A reorganization. This is really where the modern structure of the church was born.
What were the big changes?
The biggest one was decentralization. They realized they just couldn't run everything from the center. So they created union conferences and local conferences.
So middle management.
In a good way,
Yeah.
It pushed authority down. A union conference in Australia could make decisions for Australia without waiting for a letter to travel by boat to Michigan and back again. They also made the main General Conference Committee larger and more representative of the global field.
The source calls this the turning point toward unity, reform, solvency, and ardent evangelism.
And it was. It completely unclogged the arteries of the organization.
Okay, so we've covered the advances, we've got the youth, the money, the global map, the theology, the structure. But the title of this section is Significant Advances and Losses. And the losses part. It's heavy.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's the tragic side of this coin. You have to realize that while all this new life was springing up around the world, the old guard was dying out.
It's just a roll call of funerals. James White dies in 1881.
The organizational genius of the movement. Just gone.
J.N. Andrews dies in Switzerland in 1883.
Their first overseas missionary, he died in the field.
John Byington, the very first president, he dies in 1887. The source even quotes his funeral text, "To him that overcometh."
It's so poignant. And then you have J.H. Waggoner in 1889, and finally Uriah Smith, the great editor, the writer, in 1903.
That is basically the entire Mount Rushmore of the church, gone in a 20-year span.
It left a massive vacuum.
Yeah.
The pioneers were no longer there to steer the ship.
And it wasn't just death that was taking people away. There were defections.
Which can be even more demoralizing, can't it?
The source brings up D.M. Canright.
A leading minister who didn't just quietly leave, he became a very vocal opposer of the church.
And then the big one, Dr. J.H. Kellogg.
John Harvey Kellogg. Probably the most famous Adventist in the entire world at that time because of the Battle Creek Sanitarium.
I think everyone knows the Kellogg name from cereal, but in this context, he was the medical director, right?
He was the face of the health work. But the source says he began mixing pagan pantheism with Bible teachings, and it created this massive rift.
And he didn't just leave quietly.
No. He eventually left the church, and crucially, he took the Battle Creek Sanitarium with him. The church lost its crown jewel institution.
Losing the pioneers is hard. Losing your top doctor and your biggest hospital is hard. But then there were the literal fires.
The destruction of the headquarters. This is really the climax of all the losses.
The source talks about a warning that was given about a cloister effect. What does that mean?
Think of it like a bubble or an echo chamber. The Adventists had all gathered in Battle Creek. They had the college, the publishing house, the sanitarium, the main church. They were all living together, all talking to each other and becoming very, very insular.
And they were warned to spread out. For years,
Mm-hmm.
they were told to decentralize, to move institutions out, but they just kept building bigger and bigger in Battle Creek. It was comfortable.
Until it wasn't.
Until February 1902. The main building of the Battle Creek Sanitarium burns to the ground.
That must have been a shock.
Yeah.
But then it happens again.
Less than a year later, December 1902, the Review and Herald factory, the publishing house, is completely destroyed by fire.
Just try to put yourself in the shoes of a member in 1903. Your founders are dead, your most famous doctor is left, and your two biggest buildings, the hospital and the publishing house, are literally piles of ash. You'd have to think God had abandoned the movement.
It certainly felt like a judgment. The fiery broom, they called it, swept through Battle Creek. But here's the aha moment. Here's why this history actually matters.
Go on.
Those fires were the only thing that could have broken the Battle Creek cloister.
They didn't move because they wanted to. They moved because they had to. Exactly. With the buildings gone, that advice to decentralize was finally heeded. In 1903, the decision was made to move the headquarters to Washington, D.C.
So the fires literally forced them out of the nest.
They forced the church to stop being a local Michigan club and start acting like a national and international organization.
So when we look back at this quarter century, 1879 to 1904, it's not just a list of dates. It's a transformation story.
It's a metamorphosis. It's painful. You lose the safety of the cocoon. You lose the guidance of the parents. But in exchange, you get wings.
I love that image. You stripped away the legalism with 1888. You stripped away the organizational bottleneck with the 1901 reorganization. And you stripped away the physical location with the fires.
And what was left was a structure that could actually handle the 20th century. A global theology, a global organization, and a financial system to pay for it all.
It really redefines what a loss actually is, because without those losses, the advances might never have happened.
I would argue the losses were the catalyst for the advances. Comfort is the enemy of growth. And Battle Creek had just become too comfortable.
That's a powerful lesson, not just for church history, but really for anyone going through a major transition. Sometimes the things burning down around you are actually clearing the path for where you need to go.
Absolutely.
Well, we've unpacked a lot today.
Aye.
From teenage rebels to burning buildings. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a thought.
And this is one to really sit with.
If the fires hadn't happened, if the sanitarium and the Review hadn't burned, and if those pioneers had lived another 20 years, would the movement have just remained a small, localized American sect?
Would they have ever found the courage to leave Battle Creek on their own? It's a question worth asking.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.